Welcome to the CompTIA A+ 220 1101 exam, or Core 1 exam. This is Objective 3.4, Motherboard Form Factors. The fundamental physical component within all of our computers is the motherboard. The motherboard generally contains the CPU and spaces for memory. There's connectivity to power, and you've got additional slots that you can use to expand the capabilities of your system. Everything involved in the entire process of using your computer begins and ends at the motherboard. As you can imagine, there are different motherboards that have different sizes depending on your requirements. And in this video, we'll look at some of the most popular sizes that are in use today. There's usually a basic layout on these motherboards, regardless of the size, because most motherboards will include a CPU, or slots for memory or expansion. But the amount of the expansion slots and the amount of additional memory slots may vary depending on the size of the motherboard. One thing that doesn't seem to change much between motherboard versions, though, is the power connector. All of those power connectors are very standardized. And to keep compatibility through all of these different systems, you'll find that most motherboards will use the same type of power connection. We generally choose a motherboard based on the size of the case we might own, or how much future expansion we might need. And in some cases, we might choose a motherboard based on how much airflow is required to keep that system cool. If you look at Wikipedia, there are 40 different sizes and types of motherboards. Thankfully, you only need to know about 2 or 3, because those are the popular ones, and those will be the ones that are on your exam. Here's an example of where you might need to make decisions over the size of a motherboard. On the left side are smaller form factors, and they will work their way up. It's pretty common to see small form factors, mini towers, and mid towers in offices today. You can see that the desktop computer has a lot more room for the motherboard, and you can find very large size, especially when you compare it to smaller sizes that only fit the smallest of motherboards. The CompTIA exam objectives tend to focus on which motherboard you might choose for a particular task and how you might install that particular motherboard. You wouldn't generally have to memorize exact dimensions of a particular motherboard model, and generally you're choosing between 2 or 3 different motherboard types to answer one of those questions. For example, which motherboard would you use if you're putting together a media center? Maybe you have a video editing system, or maybe you're using a thin client. They all have different functions and purpose. So you need to know which motherboard and which different size for each scenario. The CompTIA exam objective focuses on 2 different motherboard families in particular. You will need to know the ATX and the ITX. The standard ATX is the motherboard that you most likely find in a desktop computer. It has a lot of real estate, plenty of room for expansion slots, lots of memory, and there's plenty of room inside of a desktop for this size of motherboard. The smaller systems, though, may require a much smaller motherboard. And you can see this mini ITX motherboard is very different in size than the larger standard ATX. You might use ATX on a desktop system, but a mini ITX motherboard might be perfect for the small form factor computer that you keep next to your television. These larger desktop motherboards are Advanced Technology Extended Motherboards, or ATX. It's a standard that's been around since 1995, and it's one that's become very popular for desktop computers. If you're buying a computer for a desktop today, you're probably buying an ATX motherboard. There have been a number of updates to the ATX standard over the years. So the ATX motherboard you find today will probably have a power connector that's 20 or 24 pins in size, and there may be additional power on the motherboard for the CPU. Let's take a look at this example. Here's an Asus Maxima 7 Hero ATX motherboard. This is a standard size, and it looks like it's well designed. It can intake a larger CPU, provide plenty of RAM with the 4 memory slots down below, and you have PCI expansion slots as well if you want to add any other components to your computer. However, if you need a more smaller form factor for your motherboard, you might want to look into the ITX motherboard. This is a style motherboard that was created by VIA Technologies in 2001. It's perfect for small form factors and smaller cases. Although this is relatively small compared to the ATX, the screw holes on the motherboard are exactly the same as the ATX motherboard. So you could even install this very small motherboard into a much larger case. That was originally designed for ATX. But the real value of these smaller motherboards is that you can fit them into much smaller cases, which can fit into much smaller areas. As I mentioned earlier, having a computer right next to your television and in those cases, it would be nice to have something much smaller instead of having a full-size desktop as a media system. We're at the end of the objective. Here's a pop quiz. What form factor would be preferred for video editing or gaming? A. XT, B. Standard ATX, C. Micro ATX, or D. Mini ITX? And the answer is Standard ATX. You want to use a standard size desktop to do any heavy computing like video editing or gaming, so you'll need to know about the ATX form factor. Thank you for watching.